What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the Fighting Games tutorial series, we're going to be going over some practice mode improvements. So in the practice mode, we load up our game and it functions mainly like a regular fight. The main differences are we show the hitboxes as well as some data, frame data and damage data. But additionally, we want to do things like make the round time infinite so that the players can remain in the practice mode forever, or make it so even when the opponent dies, the round does not end, it doesn't go through any of that logic. So I'm going to kill my opponent here, and they're going to go into their death state when I hit them here. But you'll notice they're not actually defeated. That's because we're in practice mode, and the character's health should regenerate. Or at the very least, we shouldn't go to these round transitions, and we shouldn't have timeouts. So that's what we're going to be covering today, kind of making the practice mode more of an actual practice mode. Now before we get started on this episode, I want to give a huge thank you to the Patreon members and YouTube membership supporters. Thank you guys for all the love and support. Really appreciate you guys keeping this series alive and all your kindness you've shown to me throughout the years. If you'd like to become a Patreon supporter and get the cool benefits that come with it, you can click this link in the top right corner right here, which will take you to the Patreon page. If you'd like to get caught up in the series before you watch this episode, you can click this icon in the top right corner right here, which is the entire playlist to the Fighting Games tutorial series, so you can see how we set up all these hitboxes, these throws, camera animations, and all that good stuff. If you don't care about that, but you do care about the practice mode in your game, then I recommend you watch this episode, which is where we really set up different modes and different match types, so we know what match type we're in, and we can do different logic while we're in that match. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. Now this is a code and blueprint tutorial series. We're going to be doing pretty much everything in the code today. Starting out, I want to go to our fighter template game mode.cpp. The first thing I want to do is make it so the round cannot be won when in practice mode. This will allow us to essentially have an infinite number of rounds in our game. So even if their health gets reduced to 0, they can't actually be defeated. We're not going to keep doing that round over animation, and players can continue using practice mode for as long as they want. So in fighter template game mode, we have a function called round 1. And previously in this function, this is all we were doing. We were checking to see if there was a winning character passed into the function. And if there was, we were calling the win round function on that character. Then we were checking to see if the winning character had won the appropriate number of rounds to win the match. And if they did, then we called match 1 with the winning character. And then we did notify round N and update HUD round icons on the character, which was just basically to get the character to play the proper animations and take away certain things that we don't want the characters to be able to do once the match has been won, as well as update the HUD icons so that they know how many rounds have been won. So everything that I had commented out here is what we had in the series prior to this episode. We're still going to have all that logic. I had just put it inside of 2 other if statements. Okay, so you don't have to comment this out or anything. I was just leaving that there so you know what I had previously. This if statement, so lines 112 to 123 in this example, is what was in the round 1 function prior. I have added 2 new if statements. They're very simple. And it just is basically going to determine if we are in practice mode, and if we are in practice mode, we don't want to be able to call the round 1 function, and that means that the round will never end when the player reaches their minimum health. To do this, we need to know what type of match we are in, and the game instance, base game instance.h, has a game mode type, and we set up versus, practice, story, arcade, and online. When we are going through our menu and selecting our options, we set this appropriately. So when we enter the practice mode through the button on the main menu, then we set our game mode type to be E_practice. When it is practice, we don't want the round 1 function to be called. So we go into round 1 and we grab our base game instance, and then we check to see if it is a practice game mode. To do this, we can do an if auto base game instance. This is a variable we're making. We are going to cast the game instance that is returned from get game instance. Basically, just get the current game instance that's being used and cast it to the U base game instance, which is our custom game instance class that we made in the series. If this cast succeeds, this variable will be set to the result and only if it's valid will we go into the if statement. If it's valid and we go in here, we want to grab the base game instance and we want to check the game mode type. So we get our game mode type variable that was on there. And just to show you, this was the enum. And down below we had made a variable of that type called eGameModeType. Game mode type. And now going back into the game mode, we grab that variable and we check and see if it's not equal to eGameModeType : E underscore practice. So basically for every other game mode, we want to call the round 1 function and do all the logic inside of here. But if it is practice, we're going to skip this logic. So that's simple enough. But another thing we want to do now is make sure that the timer doesn't count down. Or if it does, we want to reset it. We don't want the rounds to end due to the timer running out in practice mode either. Now, the timer is determined in tick, but actually it's determined in the blueprint tick. So let's scroll down a little bit to the tick function that I have in my Fighter Template game mode. Previously in the series, we had a blueprint tick that we were using, and we were doing the behavior in there. And then we had this num hit stop frames behavior, which just handles hit stop behavior, and it's not relevant for this episode. I have now changed the BP tick logic, and I've written it in the code instead. That way we can actually track it in the code and then check for practice mode in here. So let's go into our blueprint and let's go to our default game mode BP. We have this event called BP tick, which means blueprint tick. I had set this up so that we can call this blueprint tick function, and then we can do our round timeout logic and just decrease the round timer in general. We're going to convert this to code and have a little bit more control over it. So if you go to your event here, you could get rid of it, or we can just use it to copy the behavior over. So simply reading this, in blueprint tick, we are checking to see if our timer is active and is round time infinite is not true. So if round time is not infinite and the timer is active, then we want to decrease the time, right? Well, yes, but for every mode other than practice. So if we go into the code, you can see I have if is timer active and not is round time infinite. That's that first branch there. Now the next logic is if that returns true, we go into the if statement, we take our round time and we subtract delta time in the tick function, and we check to see if that is greater than or equal to 0.0. Basically, have we run out of round time? And that's what this branch is. So now we check if round time minus delta time, which is what's passed into the tick function, if it's greater than 0.0f, and if it is, we were setting round time to be the result of round time minus delta time. So in the code, we want to say round time minus equals delta time. If the branch returned false, we were setting round time to be 0.0, basically just clamping it to that value, so can it go lower than that? That's our else statement, and we set round time to be 0.0f. Going back into the blueprint again, we have the time over function that we're calling. This is a function that we made in the blueprint as well. So we're also going to want to convert this to the code. So I'm going to go back into the code. I want to go to my fighter template game mode.h. In this file, we scroll down to where our functions are, and I have made a new function, void timeout. I made sure not to call it the same thing just so that I didn't get any sort of conflicts when recording this video. But you can call it whatever you want. Just make sure if you do call it time over in the code that you delete this function from the blueprint first. So void timeout, this is what we are going to call when the round time has reached 0 and the round has finished due to time out. Something like that. So we're going to have to make this function, but let's go back into the gamemode.cpp and make sure we call it immediately after setting round time to be 0, just like we were doing in the blueprint. At this point, we have completely mimicked everything in the BP tick event, so we can remove it, but I'm going to wait because I want to also mimic the time over event. So going into the code here, let's go ahead and make the timeout function. And to do this, we can just go right above tick, void a fighter template game mode, : timeout. And once we do this, we're going to just copy what we have in the blueprint and instead write it in the code. First thing we do is we set the timer to not be active anymore. Is timer active is set to false. Is timer active equals false. Then we determine which player has won from having more health when the time ran out. So we were grabbing player 1 and getting their health and checking if it was greater than player 2's health. We have if player 1 get health is greater than player 2 get health, and that's the same if statement. Now, to actually grab the health from player 1 or player 2, you may have to make an accessor or a getter function. We've mentioned these before in the past, but if a variable is protected or private and you're trying to access that variable outside of the intended use area, you won't be able to just grab player health like we were able to in the blueprint. Quick solution for this is to go into the fighter template character, since that's what player 1 and player 2 are. Go down to your player health function and check what the scope is. My player health is under the protected scope. Now, the fighter template game mode is not a child of the fighter template character, thus we won't be able to grab the player health in the game mode directly. But we can scroll down to a public scope, and for me this is all the way at the bottom. We have some other functions that we can make that can return this for us. So if the functions are public, we can still call these functions even if the variables are not. This is a very common method. We were doing this for get max health and even setting the health, but we never had a just get health function that was public. So I've gone into my scope that was public and I made float get health. It is going to return the character's current health. Once you make this function, you can go into your fighter template character.cpp, and I like to keep my accessors and my mutators or my getters and setters together. So I'm going to scroll down until I get to where I want to add this function. Now you can search for it. You can put it really anywhere in here, just like you would a regular function. I'm just scrolling down to show you nothing sketchy's going on. I have a lot of logic in this file, and I have a spot where we set our health and we get our max health, and we're going there. So right here I have my getters and setters. I want to add a new one called get health. Make sure you make this float, not void, because we are returning a value, and we are returning our player health variable. So literally the entire function is just return player health. Now when we go into the fighter template game mode, we can use player 1 get health, and that way we can access the health variable from within another class. So basically, if player 1 get health is greater than player 2 get health, that's this right here. This is the true. We were calling player 1 round 1. Round 1, and we were passing in player 1. Now, we were actually doing a little bit more than that. We were getting the game instance reference and resetting the round time. But we were doing this in 2 places in the blueprint, and I decided to clean it up. So just ignore this for now. I'll cover that in about a minute. Let's go back to this branch now. So if player 1's health was not greater than player 2's health, this branch would return false, and we would go into this logic. And we were checking to see if player 1's health was less than player 2's health, or basically if player 2 should win the round. So else if player 2 get health is greater than player 1 get health. Back in the blueprint now, if this returns true, we were calling player 2 round 1, and we were doing this logic here that I just mentioned to skip above, because I'll cover that in a minute. In the code, you can see we're calling round 1 and passing in player 2, just like we did in the blueprint. Now the final condition here is if this also returns false, this means that player 1 and player 2 have the same health, so we call our round draw function. Now round draw is a function in the code already. We implemented this in previous episodes, so you don't have to worry about this right now. You should already have this. If you don't, you can watch the episode on draws. but we just want to make sure we call this in the else statement. Regardless of what case is chosen here, we want to reset the round time. So instead of doing it a bunch of different places like we were doing in the blueprint, I'm just going to do it after this logic. So all paths are going to do this. And so I'm just going to get my game instance because I need to grab the round time from it. So if auto base game instance, and we cast our get game instance to our ubase game instance type, just like we did in the round 1 function. And if this succeeds, the base game instance will have a proper reference to the game instance. So we can set the round time of the game mode to the base game instance round time. The whole reason I'm doing this section is because the game instance has a default value for the round time. So if I go to my base game instance.h, we have a round time variable in here. And the round time is the time for each round. It is not the current round time. So for example, if rounds are set to be 60 seconds long, that is what is stored in the game instance. So going back to the game mode, we want to set our current round time, how much time is currently available for the round, equal to that value. So instead of just 60, it could be 90, it could be 99, it could be 3 seconds, whatever you want. Quick edit I'm going to make here is being a little bit silly. Now, everything I said about this is true. We do want to reset the round time under all these circumstances. However, we technically already do this in the round draw function that we were calling in this else statement. So we don't want to do it twice. It won't really hurt anything, but it's just extra logic we don't need to run. And because of that, we do want to actually put this if statement right here into the if and else if conditions like we had in the blueprint. So quick fix here, just put it in both of these areas after round 1 and we will be good to go. So now we can safely remove the time over function from the default game mode BP. And we can also safely remove everything in BP tick. And since we can do that, we can also safely remove the BP tick event as a whole. You'll see that I have commented out my BP tick function call. Now at this point we can actually remove this function call as well. We don't need it any longer. And because of that, we actually can remove the BP tick function entirely from the game mode here. It is up to you if you want to do this, or if you do want to have some sort of blueprint tick functionality that also fires, you could include that as well. I'm going to remove it at this point. I'm just going to get rid of the whole BP tick. And at that point, we will use our tick function in our code for all of our game mode logic. Now, going back to the tick function once more, we had implemented the logic that was in the blueprint tick, but we want to add something now, and that is the check to make sure we are not in practice mode, because I don't want the round time to go down if we're in practice mode, and I don't want to experience a timeout if we are in practice mode. So this highlighted logic, the logic we added in today's episode, I'm going to encompass that in 2 if statements, and it's going to be the 2 if statements that we did in the round 1 function. So if auto base game instance, and we cast our game instance to the custom game instance that we made. If it succeeds, we'll go into this if statement, and this will be a reference to the game instance. We're going to grab our game mode type and make sure it is not equal to eGameModeType e_practice. So this logic will work in every mode other than practice mode. At this point, we'll want to relaunch. The editor is back open and we can go into the game, and specifically we want to go to our practice mode. At this point, we should see what we saw earlier in the demo where the round timer is not going down. It is staying at the value that it started at, which was 60 in this case. Additionally, if I go through the effort of defeating my opponent yet again, they should not be defeated when they run out of health. Of course, there are more things we can do with practice mode, such as maybe changing the time to an infinity symbol or regenerating the enemy's health over time, different things like that. We will be covering all of these things, but this is the first true step to having a functional practice mode that we can use and play around with. Additionally, you'll want to make sure that your other features are working. So if I go to versus mode, timer should still count down, and you can see that it does. And if I defeat my opponent here, you should see that my round win will go up and the opponent will be defeated, just like a regular match. And there you go. So anyway, guys, that's all I got for you. If this helped you make your practice mode a little bit better and a little bit more like a standard or traditional practice mode, then please subscribe. It does more for myself in the series than anything else you can do, and I just really appreciate it. I also want to give a huge shout out again to my YouTube membership and Patreon members and supporters. Thank you guys for all the love. If you had any issues with this tutorial, feel free to join the Discord community. There's a link in the description, and I would be happy to help you. Like I said, guys, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.